Let me ask you about development in your suburb. Has your suburb lost the character and charm it once had because of development? 1300 222 612 was the phone number.
This is ABC Radio Brisbane with Steve Austin.
I ask you that question about the character of your suburb because right now, as I go to where the Brisbane City Council is debating whether or not they introduce a temporary ban on new townhouse and apartment developments. Now, this would mean that no new townhouses or apartments could be built in some suburbs not designed for them. It's called a temporary planning instrument. I won't bore you with the bureaucracy, but essentially the council is currently debating a temporary ban on new townhouse and apartment developments in Brisbane suburbs as in an attempt to protect backyards. This would mean that no new townhouses could be built in suburbs not designed for them. Councillor Jared Cassidy is the Labor opposition planning spokesperson in the Brisbane City Council. I spoke to him just before coming to air and asked him what's the ban that the council's considering.
Well, Steve, what we saw last year is that Council started progressing an amendment to City Plan, which we supported, which would outlaw units and townhouses in low-density residential areas that are predominantly reserved for single standalone homes.
Can you cite a suburb, for example? Is there a suburb that is a good example of this?
Yeah, so what we've seen is some examples of developers taking advantage. So in Mount Gravatt East, there's been a well-publicised example of some koala habitat on low-density residential land that's now been proposed for units. Out at Holland Park or Morningside, there's been a couple of development applications that have gone in on low-density residential land for units and townhouses. So in the interim, this process can take some time. Amendments to City Plan can take up to 2 years, what we've seen in the past. So in October last year, Labor councillors proposed a temporary planning instrument, exactly the same as we're seeing come to council today. That was rejected back in October, but we're happy at least the administration now is taking our lead, and we will be supporting that temporary ban today.
So essentially, you'd like to see a ban on townhouses and apartment developments in suburbs that weren't designed for them.
Yeah, that's right. So as the outcome of the process called Plan Your Brisbane, there was much fanfare about that, and the council came out, and one of their big announcements out of that was stopping units and townhouses in the low-density residential zone land. We supported that going forward, and but we've been really concerned that the delay in which the changes come into effect, because an amendment to City Plan requires quite a lot of backwards and forwards with the Department of Planning. It has to go to consultation. We said the intent is clear to stop development of low-density blocks into units and townhouses. We should have that temporary protection in place. We proposed that back in October last year. Since then, we've seen 3 new development applications go in. One of them at Mount Gravatt East is replacing 3 standalone homes with 29 units. Another one at Holland Park is replacing 6 standalone homes with 26 units. And this is all in land that is zoned for low-density single-house living. So we think it's really important that this temporary protection is put in.
Will this prevent applications that have already been lodged with the council?
Well, unfortunately, not necessarily. It certainly will help council in its position of not allowing units and townhouses in these areas, but because of the delay and these development applications have already gone in, council isn't able to simply reject them anymore. So it will certainly help, but because of the delay we've seen here from the council administration, it will certainly be harder to reject these development applications.
I'm speaking with Councillor Jared Cassidy, Labor's opposition planning spokesperson in Brisbane City Council. Right now, the council is debating on whether or not they introduce a temporary ban on new townhouses and apartment developments in some suburbs in Brisbane. This is ABC Radio Brisbane. Steve Austin's my name. Now, this was introduced in October last year. It didn't get up. What makes you think it'll get up now?
Well, the difference this time is that the Lord Mayor and his civic cabinet are bringing this themselves. So while they wouldn't support Labor's proposal in October last year, it's the exact same proposal in February this year. So for some of these properties and some of these communities, it will be too little too late, but we're very prepared to support this. And given the Lord Mayor's bringing it into council, we're pretty confident that his LNP colleagues will support it as well.
In September last year, prior to your attempt, the council did ask the state government to grant them approval to amend the council's plan to stop this from happening. Why didn't your state Labor counterparts grant that request?
They certainly have been working with council, and I've just spoken to the Minister's office again today about this to make sure that we have all the facts before we go into council.
Yes, but they didn't grant it. I mean, they asked for it and they didn't give it to them, did they?
Well, no amendment to city plan can be granted immediately. So there is a range of things that need to happen. A state interest check, which is what council requested of the state government, of which they did. It also has to go out to public consultation. So this package, even with the temporary planning protections, this package of permanent amendments will still have to go out for public consultation. So when council says they asked the state government to act in September, there was never ever a chance that it would be progressed within a year, and council knew that, but they haven't been very upfront about it. That's why we called for a temporary protection to go alongside with the permanent protection, which could take up to 12 months.
Is it likely that the move will be passed this afternoon or this evening by the council?
Yeah, well, we think the temporary local planning instrument, as it's called, will pass tonight, which will then be sent to the state government for their approval. That's a much quicker process than a full amendment to city plan.
And as a Labor council, do you think the state government will sign off on it?
Well, we certainly will be calling for that, and we have made that very clear. That's our position down here in council. People in these suburbs, not just in Marrickville East and Holland Park and Morningside, where we've seen these applications, in communities all over Brisbane, they've been crying out for these sort of changes. So we're very confident that the state government will have a look at this and should approve it.
I'll leave it there. Councillor Jared Cassidy, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Councillor Jared Cassidy is Labor's opposition planning spokesperson in the Brisbane City Council. The temporary local planning instrument requires a final approval by the state government before it's enforceable. We did contact the Minister for State Development, Infrastructure and Planning, Cameron Dick's office, for comment. However, he is unavailable this afternoon. Natalie Rayment is from the group Yes in My Backyard, which is a not-for-profit organisation that supports what they say is good development. Natalie Rayment, give me your initial reaction to the plan by the council currently being debated on a temporary ban on townhouses and apartments.
Steve, I'm really concerned about that. For me, it's disappointing. I think it's fast-tracking the eroding of housing choice in our low-density suburbs. And I think having housing choice that we've had for 30 or more years in our low-density suburbs, that you could buy a single family dwelling on a quarter-acre block, a smaller block, or a townhouse. They're all forms of low-density housing, and they've all been available for over 30 years. And to do this as a instantaneous temporary ban without going through the formal process and the public consultation, I think that would be unfortunate for Brisbane.
What will it mean? What will it mean practically for people buying houses or wanting to buy houses?
Well, it's going to take a little while further. So my understanding is it's gone up to council today, but that's a proposition that still needs to be signed off by the minister.
Yes.
So it may mean nothing tomorrow, but if it does proceed, then it will make it very difficult to propose a townhouse development in our low-density suburbs. Now, that is the majority of our residential land in Brisbane. So in Brisbane, in the majority of residential areas of Brisbane, all you will have as a choice in the future, if this goes ahead, will be a single-family dwelling on a privately owned lot with public roads, and that is more expensive on average than a townhouse. So it will mean locking people out of the Brisbane market.
So it sort of locks people into more expensive options.
Absolutely.
Does it mean more townhouses or apartments on existing sites?
No, these are existing sites. So these are our low-density suburbs, not our emerging community suburbs out in the edges of Brisbane. This is really our middle ring suburbs that are already zoned for low-density housing, and they are what we would call, as planners, infill development. These are existing sites. They might have 1 or 2 houses on them. Might be in Wavell Heights, might be in the Gap, it might be in Ashgrove. These are existing sites where there's been traditionally perhaps a McMansion or one house just on a traditionally large block sitting there in the suburbs, and this is what it will stop.
Many of my listeners call at different times over the last couple of years and express concern that parts of the city are losing their character and charm due to overdevelopment. Often West End is suggested. The western suburbs are often suggested. John sent me a message saying, my western suburb has been trashed by Brisbane City Council's permitting unit development. Do you acknowledge that, or do you see that point that the character of many of the Brisbane suburbs, of the larger backyards, has been lost or being lost?
I find it a fascinating discussion because West End probably has no low-density residential areas. You look at other character areas, places in Brisbane that we all think of as character areas like Wilston. Look at all those inner suburb areas, and they're not low-density areas. They're low-medium density areas where there can be a mix of housing, character housing, and units, and it creates vitality. It creates a nice level of density that can support shops and restaurants, and they are our character suburbs. And this is not traditionally our low-density residential neighbourhoods. These are the middle ring suburbs, not the inner city suburbs.
Last year you wrote an article that said, in your view, Brisbane was closed for business when it comes to development. Do you still hold that view?
I think that it is closed for... It's putting the message out there that it's closed for townhouse developments that are good, affordable, alternative options that people want and people are choosing. I mean, there are people already buying these or renting these every year, and they're choices for people, choices for downsizers perhaps who are not ready to move into retirement. They're choices for millennials who are trying to get into the housing market and can't afford a house on a large block in our suburbs. They're choices for people who need some lower maintenance. They might be choices for people who want to live within a group, the sharing economy, share some communal open space, share some private road, and live in a more compact form of low-density housing.
I appreciate your time, Natalie Rayment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Natalie Rayment is from Yes in My Backyard, a not-for-profit that says they support good development.